it's 3 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'll call the meeting to order. What I usually like to do is just to go around the table and introduce ourselves so that everybody knows who is here. And the way that we run this academic committee meeting is it's fairly informal in that we are so appreciative of all input for the conversation, and the only thing that we ask is that no one speaks over anybody and we wait our turn to talk. But this is meant to go deeper into things, which is what we do at the committee level. So again, thank you for being here. Well, I thought that we could just go around. Yeah, Mr. Bennett, would you just start and get us
Sure.
going?
I'm Terry Bennett. I'm Director of Special Revenue for the Beaver County School District.
Okay.
Frank Rodriguez, Superintendent.
Christine Watts, Board Member and Chair.
Molly Murphy-Brown.
Williams County Board Member. Earl Campbell.
Al Kimmel, committee member.
Tricia Fidrich, Academic Committee Chair.
Kathy Robine, board member.
Bernadette Hampton, math teacher at Battery Creek High School.
And I'm Denise Maxon, I work in Title I with Terry.
Tony Cambria, parent, resident.
Nancy Zabarsky, I'm a science teacher at Beaver High School, parent of children in the district, or child, soon-to-be children in the district, and former teacher of the year.
District Teacher of the Year.
Yes.
Yes, district, not just school. Not that that's just a just, but.
Rachel Jones, education reporter for the packet.
Great, again, thank you. Oh, hey Allison, we were just going around introducing ourselves. And you are welcome to sit at the table or whatever.
This is the seat.
It's open, yes. And so would you just introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Allison Thomas, and I'm the principal at Riverview and a parent of 2 Beaver County School District students. One that graduated in June, so I guess now I only have 1 Beaver County School District.
Great, thank you for coming. All right, we're going to, we've called the meeting to order, so we're going to stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first thing, Mr. Campbell and Ms. Robine, is that we need to approve the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda.
All right, all in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Next would be public comments. And before we start that, can we just, hi, welcome. Hi, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Alice Bowles, and I work as a tutor at TCF.
Great, welcome, thank you for coming. So are there any public comments? Anybody have anything they'd like to say before we delve into the agenda items? Okay, again, just for everyone's edification, this is fairly informal. Okay, so if you have something to share or question to ask, the only thing is that we ask that you not speak over anyone. Okay, so please do so. All right, we're going to start the school calendar, and Mr. Bennett is going to present that to us.
Okay, if you notice on the handout, and until those of you have a packet, if they don't have a packet, there's something bigger they can look at
Okay.
as well, and also Denise this as well too. Thank you. The committee vetted this right after we had gotten the 1920 calendar finally approved late in the year. I think everybody, including maybe you, even called it at one point and said, when's the calendar going to be approved? Anyway, moving on. So we were ready, and actually I was on calendar for a few days in April to bring this calendar to y'all. That's why the date hasn't been changed. So nothing has changed since then. That's why I wanted to know why that date is that way. Okay. The calendar committee, you go to the next page, is made up of not an incredibly large number of people, but enough people to give me a fair cross-section of the district, including teachers, coaches, principals, and those kind of things. Matter of fact, there may be a name or two that don't even work here anymore, since this took place back in February, March, in that kind of area. But just so you know that's who was involved. And then if we go over to the big issue page, you will see that we've been doing this calendar for a while. It's pretty much, I know I say this every time in the school board meeting, it is not rocket science. It's 180 days. You gotta start when the state law says start. You gotta take certain holidays off. Y'all don't like going to school on Saturday for some reason. So we're left down to only so many things we can do. The biggest tail wagger after that is, of course, it's going to be when does the heritage take place?
Right.
And then after that, when do you end your first semester? And that's probably the hottest topic you're going to hear about today. When you get past that, it kind of comes down to what do you believe in. Should you have full weeks of instruction? Do you take off certain holidays? Do you not take off certain holidays? Are federal holidays important, not important? And then of course, then you know, you got to put those 3 makeup days somewhere, and you got to put those 3 half days somewhere. Once again, if it was rocket science, I would not be involved. It's pretty straightforward. All right, 180 days, and it's that simple. So what I do is we always ask the committee to vote on those big issues. So you go to where it says committee voting. Basically 5 meant they felt very strongly about it. 1 meant they did not care for it. You know, number 1 at the very top thing they didn't care about the most was using Saturdays as makeup days. We lived that disaster about 3 years ago, if any of you remember.
That was
We apparently did learn from that 1 mistake, and so we're not going to repeat it anytime soon. Then looked at other possibilities and other things to kind of get us an idea of where we're going. Because once they do this voting, then I just start putting days into the calendar, and then we start betting over each and every day. You know, we have had, just for historical purposes, we've had Hilton Head have a separate holiday because of the heritage than north to the side of the river. We've also had where we only took off the Thursday and the Friday for the heritage. Causes for some issues, causes for some things. Then, of course, if you only take 2 days there, you're going to give people a full spring break another time and things of that nature. So those issues kind of play into it. So we use this as a guiding principle. We also have done the same vote with our teachers, just so you know. That kind of to get some ideas on where we stand. If you go to the next page, page 5, there are some things that are out of our control. One thing that the state legislature likes to do is legislate, and they like to make rules. And so until we can get Horry County to back off of the 3rd Monday, and we will never be starting, we're always going to be starting probably as close to the 3rd Monday as possible, because that is the day that's allowed. There are certain holidays that are involved, and there's certain ways you can even make up the days. Even if election day falls in the year or not. This coming year, we actually have to always worry about even leap day falling in, and it throws things off if people forget about things like that. So those things are out of our control. If you go to page 6, this was from a few years ago. I was just showing you. So I took that. You can go to the state website and you can look at all of the calendars at the same time. So you can just look at them and you can kind of see what other people are doing. For example, we get told all the time, well, you're the only district that does spring break because of that heritage. Ironically, 53 other people 2 years ago did the same exact, or last year did the exact same spring break. Must have been a good time to do it then, you know what I mean? Because it actually was. I think Good Friday was in there, and Easter was in there, right? Yeah. You know, and then of course, there's a lot of other things you can see that the districts did and didn't do. I just kind of showed that sometimes we don't do things. We think we're doing a lot of things uniquely. We really aren't. A lot of things, people pretty much do the same calendar year to year and have the same ideas. Of course, as you know, we have gone 3 years in a row with either near misses or bad hits or whatever you want to call it from hurricane. A few years ago, if you remember, we took off lots of days because of snow. We gave snow a break, we've gone to hurricane, so I'm not sure what's next. All right, so that's just something we have to kind of deal with. If you go to page 7, shows some key differences. Basically, the calendar that the committee recommended, which is the big calendar that's up there, it's also in your packet as well, is that they would follow basically the same format. The committee has said they like doing that, keeping it the same. Of course, the problem is there was a few things that were different. In 2021, of course, you have an election day. If you have to do election day, that's hard to have Veterans Day on an 85-95 calendar. And of course, Easter and spring break are sometimes connected, sometimes they're not. In 2021, they were 2 weeks apart. I don't know how the Masters allowed that to happen, but anyway, because that's actually when Heritage is decided. You got to play the Masters first, and that's when the Heritage happens. It's all about golf. And of course, it looks like if you could, you actually, because it could be possible to end in May 2021, which is great because we have so many summer programs that we like to get started as soon as we possibly can. This is just some thoughts. The calendar is on page 8. It's hard to read, so that's why you have it in your packet in another format in Excel that makes it easier. If you go all the way to page 10, I'd just like to always remind people that a lot of people, Riverview included, can't wait on us to do our calendar so that they can do their calendar, so that the sooner we can. I would like to also say the committee's also even looked at a 21-22 calendar. I'll soon be out of this loop, so I'm not going to go any further on that after that, but my point is that, you know, if you pick a format, we can just kind of replicate it forward. But the biggest thing, of course, is that people have to decide is when do you want to, like I said, the same question is, do you want to include the heritage, and when do you want to end the first semester? I know those are hot buttons for people. Guys, I have no skin in the game. I was principal at a year-round school, so if you want me to know what kind of calendar I'd bring to y'all, it'd be a whole different story. So that's what I have for you. I mean, the calendar's in there. Also in there was what the possibility is if you did not want to end the first semester, instead of having an 85, 95, it'd have a kind of like traditional calendar. There's that calendar, an example. The committee has not vetted that, so they did not, that's not what they were interested in. But we can easily, if that's what the board wants, you can take it back and have them vet. So I'm open for questions and anything. Unfortunately I can do this in my sleep, so I probably did, so I've got
You said that you had the same input from teachers?
Yes, but I didn't bring the whole.
Can you tell me how many teachers
Yes, I can.
replied and what their?
I have it right here. Actually, if you want, I'll pass this down. This is the key question number 2, and I'll send some down that way.
Okay.
And if you notice that that on this poll, over 1,299 teachers voted on question 2. Pass it behind us so they'll have that. They can have some too.
You all don't have this.
Yeah, it was extra. I may have been in the packet. I'm not sure.
It was.
Oh, it was? Okay.
I
I didn't know. Molly did a great job too. But I was sending her stuff even in the last minute. But anyway, if you look at that calendar, 1,299 voted, and the idea, they gave a score of 5, which means they believed in that statement, is that they believed highly in ending it at that time. I don't know. I did not break it down to, was that all elementary, all high school, all north of Broad, south of Broad? I did not do any of that. I mean, basically, we just did a generic, we asked them the same guiding questions we asked the committee. When we do makeup days, we will do the same. If we ever have to do a makeup day, and somebody comes to me and says, make a calendar to do the makeup days, then I will send that out to all the teachers to vote on as well.
So, Terry, so my understanding from what you just said is that this quarter 2 finished the first semester before Christmas break. If you were not a proponent of that and you wanted a 90-90 calendar, you'd mark off number 1?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. If it's important, you would give it a 5. If it's not important, you give it a 1. Yes.
So I know that one of the issues with the 85-95 calendar is, of course, fewer days in the first semester. So I was looking at the data for the second semester, which is 95, and we're talking about test results. So I went on to find out what the testing window is for SC Ready, and I know that the tests are given in a window 20 days before the end of the school year. So my question is typically, so in my thinking, if we're testing 20 days before the end of that semester, or even 10 days before the end of that semester, then the instructional times are the same. So that's my question. Do we know when we typically test? And maybe the teachers, I don't know that.
Let me just insert one thing. This insert will probably not be any as good as the teacher's answer, but I will tell you that's one of the reasons why we do not put a half day at the end of December, because we know that that's going to be part of the testing window and you don't want to mess that up. Because sometimes people always say, well, why don't we do a half day before Christmas break? I've been told, please avoid that because you might need that half day for testing and end of course tests for those things.
Yeah.
You probably, some of you could probably answer it a lot better than I could.
Well,
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you're here, so.
That's what I'm
SC
trying to
ready
do.
is not a high school test.
Right, it's,
Right,
right.
it's-
And so that's a different type of question, and I don't know what its intent is off the top of my head. Is it a course content test,
No.
the way the EOC is? And so would you be impacted negatively if you took it 20 days before you were completely finished? But
Oh,
if
it's
you
an
took the
achievement.
EOC,
It's achievement for the year.
an EOC is the course content test.
Right.
And we do try to put those as close to the end of the semester as we can in order for us to instruct meaningfully before the test on that content. We have to meet those standards.
And that's because the testing window for that, according to the state, is the same. You can give the EOC,
Luckily, our leadership has been very,
Yeah.
I would say, forward-thinking and putting it as close to the end of
As
the year as
close
we
to the
can. But I've heard other teachers from across the country saying that their schools do, for some reason, give their final state-level assessments significantly before the end of their teaching the course, which seems like a very bad thing to do, in my opinion. But we don't
I
do
could
that.
actually say
So
that
we
Laurel
don't do
Bay
that.
School,
We don't do that.
Laurel Bay does do their main testing usually like in March.
Do they?
Yeah, but see, for them, they're probably figuring they got the same, maybe it's like a 135-day window that they're looking at
Right.
versus a 180-day window or something.
Yeah.
So how close is testing to spring break?
AP tests begin 2 weeks after our current spring break, which does make it, well, the other high school-centric problem, and I know the calendar can't revolve around high school, but the other high school-centric problem with the positioning of spring break is that some schools, and ours is usually one of them, have prom coming in, which, whether we think it should or not, is a very big distractor to our students' learning. Having that distraction coming in right after spring break, followed with 1 week before AP tests start. For your AP classes, you really have to have finished the bulk of what you expect to get done before spring break. Because after that, it's just a roller coaster of distraction and things getting in the way.
well, May 6th, I believe, I looked that up as well, when the AP tests were scheduled for next year, and I believe May 6th is the first day that one will be given
It's
next year.
the first Monday of May
Oh.
is usually, mine is the second
Oh.
Monday. Mine would be the
Okay,
10th.
well, when I looked up online on the state website.
Wait, I'm looking at the next year's calendar.
This is 2021.
Yes,
Oh,
we're a year ahead.
Okay.
I don't know the date.
Yeah, what I looked up online gave me 1920, okay, sorry, yeah.
Mr. Cambrian?
Question, 1299 staff members responded to this semester question. How many of these are going to be affected by a semester or a non-semester calendar? Is my first question. My second question is, if the semester drives our instruction program, wouldn't that be something that would determine what is best for the learning criteria? And, you know, I think all of us agree that 95, 85 is not something we can really debate favorably for. There is a disbalance there, so I think that that's an important question that we have to look at. And if it's about assessments, if that's one of the things that drives our learning calendar, I think we have to really look at that's gonna be the end result of what determines this decision. That's just the way I'm looking at it. So the question is, 60% of our kids are not affected by semesters, K through 7. So we could end December, we could end January, we could end whenever we want. That doesn't affect them at all. It's the secondary students who are taking the end of course exams. Really, they're the ones who really are affected by this. So how many of our kids are taking end of course exams, and how significant are those results for what we're here for?
I think the biggest issue also that, teachers face with the, with the winter break is they want those exams wrapped up before the kids go, because otherwise the kids are going on a 2-week hiatus, right, on vacation, and then coming back. And I don't know, defer to our teachers here, but I think that's usually what I hear as of a concern for teachers when it comes to that winter break.
I think that's an issue. The caveat being, if there would be winter break and then we'd come back and the testing window would begin immediately, I mean, that would be extraordinarily bad.
Yeah.
But if there was the luxury to teach up until Christmas break and then a week for review before the testing began, which would push the first semester going up to maybe the 18th of January. But then that comes at the cost of pushing the second semester testing window, the days of instruction for a large number of students who take AP tests. They have fewer days of instruction, and so someone is going to have a trade-off. I know my biggest concern is in the weather makeup days, where this calendar is functional the way it is. I can instruct, and I do biology, and biology has a very wide breadth of standards. They give us a lot of content to cover, and I can do it in 85 days. But when you start pushing weather makeup days to, on the calendar we're looking at here, to like January 4th, that is a meaningless instructional day. We will have taken the EOC, and so now I have 84 days instead of, if we had weather problems, if we had to make up a day on January 4th, that would be after exams. We would still have done exams in December. We wouldn't come back and give EOCs on January 4th. And so if January 4th turned from a PD day to a weather makeup day for semester 1 to give us the instructional time we need, that's checking a box on paper. And so it's not until we run into the problem of weather makeup time and where we put that time in a meaningful way that this has a problem, in my experience, for the last 3 years. But I don't know how to solve that problem.
I just want to say, even though we've had the weather makeup days on the calendar, we have yet to follow them. Because the board always comes and votes and changes.
But this past year, we did use two
of them,
professional development
yeah.
days after the testing window.
Right, I'm just saying that, so even though it seems like we put it on paper, you would hope it'd be in stone, and that's not necessarily how, I'm just talking from the historical part of it.
Mr. Campbell?
Considering Tony's discussion, 85, 95, it's not a disadvantage when you consider all the components of the 95-day semester. You consider the spring break, and the fact that prom and the end of the year testing, that kind of cut that window, and our numbers don't show that the 85-day semester is a disadvantage in terms of academics. The numbers don't show that. The numbers actually, the first semester actually has done a little better than the second semester.
Let me piggyback on that, because I think if we're going to use data, I think we should use data in developing our decisions, is that kids who take AP exams in the fall and don't take the test until the spring, the end of the spring semester, because that's when the AP exams are offered for those kids, do not do any better or any worse than the kids who take the AP course in the spring. So that window of delay, if there is time for remediation and review, the students who have that skill level, don't lose it. So, let's use the data then, the other way. The question I have for the 95, 85 is, if we see 95 does not do anything to enhance the mastery or the competency level, I think we need to look at that. I think that's a different topic that maybe we need to discuss, because seat time, we are cutting seat time down to the bare bone with the 85 days. I mean, we are down to the bone. We're looking at 121, and that's if we maximize the 85-minute block, which I'm not sure how often we do that or not. So, we have to be able to make an argument that, and I don't want to call it an argument, we have to make a rationale that I think will be able to be defendable to people who are going to question, because no matter what calendar you're going to come up with, you're going to offend somebody. But I think what's for us what should be the driving forces, what is the academic mission.
In the plan for the weather, we are at the bare minimum. We have to make up the days in the fall semester in
Yeah.
high school to meet our state mandated 120 hours. And there are not enough weather makeup days to meet the needs for the past 3 years scheduled on the calendar. And that's some of the reason we haven't used the ones that have been scheduled on the calendar, because there just aren't days to schedule that fall in the fall semester. And so we're kind of setting ourselves up against a situation that you don't know how to solve, but you know very possibly could happen.
I have a question about that, and forgive my ignorance. You mentioned the 85-minute block. Is there not an opportunity to do a 90-minute block and give cushion that if you don't get the weather makeup days in before Christmas break, that the master schedule permits a cushion in there that is accumulating the seat time?
I use the 85 as the average, because normal blocks are either 80 minutes or 90 minutes. If you go nationally, that's what their block schedules consist of, between 80 and 90.
But
Each
to
school
Dr.
develops
Obarski's
their own.
point, right,
Yeah.
that if what you're up against is if you miss 3 days in the fall, you have to find them in the fall, because without them, the kids don't have the 120 hours. Then the question is, do you just build that in 5 minutes a day, every day, so that instead of accumulating 120 hours that fall, they're accumulating 130 hours that fall? So if you miss 2 days and you only get 1 day in, you've got a little cushion in there, but you've just built it in over the longer. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
But the drawback to that is that, in my opinion, isn't adding meaningful instruction time, because by the end of 80 minutes, they're pretty much spent for the day, and so you're meeting it once again on paper, like adding the days on after the testing windows, meeting it on paper, but is it meeting it in a meaningful instructional way?
Have we had a 90-90 calendar in the past?
Not on a 4x4.
Not
When
on
we
a
were
4x4.
AB,
Okay.
Yeah.
and well, then it didn't
It's a
matter.
different discussion.
Yeah.
It's a different discussion.
To Mel Campbell's point, you were referencing that data that we received the first time that Mr. Bennett presented the calendar. And you're right, it did show, much to my dismay, that.
2 years, no. It's
Yeah, no,
really-
1 year's
it's
worth,
really-
you're right, 1 year's data, but I thought there would have been a huge disparity between the 85-day schedule and a 95-day semester. And as the data was presented, there wasn't, so that just gave me some pause. I do remember that there was a conversation about how going into January to end the semester, how that affects our dual enrollment. Okay, our dual enrollment, does someone want to speak to that?
I would, because,
Yeah.
and I would just say, and I'm not an expert on any of this. I usually one down to talk to other people when these kind of questions come up. But I will not tell you that the number of students that are now graduating in the December window are increasing, because we're offering more and more classes at the middle school level, and then they're getting more opportunity, because if they take for a semester, you can knock out a high school diploma pretty fast. I can testify, I cheated the system back in the day, okay? All right, you can do it. And so we're getting more and more, and of course, the idea is that if then they could go on to post-secondary, move on or whatever.
Right.
So, those windows close the further you in the next semester into January. People at USCB told me, I asked, person there said that, we expect you to be enrolled, your classes selected, and everything in December. You can't wait to graduate in January and then come and enroll. So that was my only take on it, because I truly did not understand part of the problem either. So that's so I want to be able to answer that question within the committee. So if that came up, so.
Right, and that was something that was brought up, and I had not considered that either. So, Mr. Campbell?
If we were to change the start time, school start time date, how would that affect testing?
I think the window begins early enough in December at the state level and goes into January that it wouldn't affect our testing windows for EOCs, and that's all I can speak to.
Did you say
It's just
those?
start
I'm
time.
talking about the start time of school.
If we started
Right,
a
but
week
the,
early,
I mean, the window's broad enough that it would still fall within the state testing window when we would be,
but by
we
starting.
would give us more days.
Mr. Campbell, are you talking about the hour of the day?
Yeah.
Or are you talking
No,
the
I'm talking
the
about
August start
the
time?
August.
But it's mandated by the state. We can't
Well,
start earlier
well,
than.
The reason I'm saying that, because, I've talked to several people, and they said that maybe what we need to do is talk to our delegation to change that.
Right.
And that each school district start having its own start time.
Right. And we did speak to the delegation about that when we were up there in February, March. February, March. We spoke to them and explained how we needed them to allow, at least by county, let us start 5 days earlier. Problem solved.
We also put it in the letter that we
Right.
sent there.
That's right.
That we,
How
board
they
approved letter.
respond?
We have not received, well, you're,
I will call.
Let me just say that 2 years ago, there was legislation in, this past year, there was not one single bill that mentioned changing the start date. So my point is that Ori has got us where they want us.
right.
A number of districts that have asked for waivers from the education oversight committee.
You're going to say that? I don't know that.
Terry just said that they don't give a waiver.
They do not give waivers. We've asked so many times, we've asked everybody from the state superintendent down to anybody in the state accountability office. They say there are no exceptions unless your district adopts a year-round calendar, which I'm not gonna go there, but that's the only way. You can't even do it, you could do it, and basically they said you could do it maybe for a school that had a particular case, but not district-wide. So there are no exceptions. Listen, I get it every year about the same time. I get these same questions, and I just respond back to the same people. And I ask different people, and I get the same answer,
Yeah.
including their legal counsel.
Yeah.
We've got 3 years.
And I'm coming from a different state that kind of had the same issues here in districts, and there wasn't a waiver per se for the beginning school day, because we had legislated one in Texas, but there was another law that allowed districts to be districts of innovation.
Yes, pilots.
On that, and so those were, we became a district of innovation, so then you have a little more flexibility on different kind of, and the first thing of 400 out of 1,000 districts was changing their start time, start date.
Start date.
So I don't know if there's somewhere in South Carolina law about that, so.
Okay.
To follow up on that, just basically what they told me is you could have a school of innovation that needed a different calendar, but you could not have a
Okay.
district. Once again, we keep asking, one day, we might get a different answer.
I'd like to ask, Mr. Campbell, as our
Yeah, I will give
legislative,
her a call.
I would appreciate just some follow-up and maybe provide some information. Dr. Omarski?
Well, one thing that goes back to our previous statement is, I think we also need to keep in mind, in addition to any dual enrollment at TCL or USCB, we do have the early college high school, whose model would be greatly affected by not ending in a similar way as the universities. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that needs to be kept in mind as well. And I know when the teacher forum asked about teacher opinions, the majority of teachers who felt strongly that it needed to, the majority of high school teachers, secondary teachers who felt strongly that the semester needed to end for the Christmas break were at Whale Branch, because it's particularly important for them, and that's not something we should take lightly.
Absolutely, you're right.
School of Innovation.
To Mr. Cambria's point, though, it would be very illuminating to have another year's worth of data. To see how it turned out, the same data that we got, how the EOCs, broken down by semester and everything, and so then we could see.
I'll go back 3 years, when you started the block. I think the block started, 4 years ago?
I don't know when the block started, or when the 85-95 calendar started.
Because
Was it-
that's what created the dilemma, was the block.
Right, right. And that started, Allison, when did that start?
I believe 4 years ago.
Okay.
It starts to blend together, and it's either 3 or 4. I can't remember how long.
I think it's 4.
I think so too.
Having
Yeah.
lived that.
If you're gonna ask for that data from data services, I think you also should ask about the number of early graduates as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But I think that may have, I mean, that number is, and also 3 years, it's increasing because more and more students are figuring out how to get those credits and classes in.
Yes.
Don't take electives, don't do study halls, people do even have it. Anyway, but you know,
Yeah,
so,
Data should be our friend.
yeah. In that EOC result.
So having had children in the Beaver County School District from 1995 to 2015, I can tell you, we have had both 4x4 previously and before the last 4 years, and we've also had that AP alternation. It's gone back and forth multiple times.
Right.
Yeah, you would have talked to
And I talked through all of those.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll venture a bet that first semester scores are higher than second semester scores a high percentage of time. Because just the nature of students and the climate and all of the activities that's happening during the springtime. And we're talking juniors and seniors during the springtime, it's a different mentality.
I will say though, having lived it firsthand with my daughter who graduated in June, she had 4 AP classes in the fall and did not take a single AP exam until May. And I would tell you, as her mother, I believe that did adversely impact, her scores. That had she had those classes all spring and gone into those exams fresh, it would have been a very different, no, granted, she did fine, but the point being, I do think there, in maintaining the 4x4 schedule, I would encourage us to think creatively about those AP, about the master scheduling, about the opportunity. Lab sciences are year-round, but many of the classes are not, so when the kids take AP statistics in the fall but don't sit for the AP exam until May, that's a long break in math instruction before they sit for those exams. And I have to believe that you would see that the students perform better had they taken AP stats from, from January to May than when they take it from August to December and then have a 5-month hiatus until such time as they sit. So it would be interesting to see on the 4-year trend whether or not, particularly I have to think for those classes where the students don't have the closure of the final assessment until May. So students who take into course exams and they can take those in December, that's different, but when the AP exams are only administered in a window in May and those kids are taking those, having that instruction in the fall, it's gotta be tough. To reach back and look into what you learned in August.
The data doesn't show that though. The AP data does not show that there's a significant difference.
For the 1 year.
For
all 4 years.
For all 4 years, yeah. Between the fall AP exams and the spring AP exams, very insignificant.
Do we have AP exams in the fall? No, so the EOC.
No, it's, the kids who take, some kids take the AP exams in the fall and then take the test in the spring, because that's the only time the AP tests are given.
I hear what you're saying.
Right,
So
they
they-
take the class in the
They
fall,
take in the
but they
fall,
sit for the exam.
yes, and they sit for the exam in the spring, and there's very little
But this is
difference.
national you're talking about?
This is national, yes.
Yeah, but what are you dealing with? You're dealing with the top students.
And sometimes that might also be because in the second semester, they have some sort of,
They have
tutorial.
They have a 2-week, yes.
Yeah.
Just like, but they're all, yeah, they do
But
that.
it's the science
do.
it's the science of being a good student in terms of that. I mean, most
Yeah.
of the students pick their battles and when they need to take these courses because they're looking for that content
Yeah.
and being able to get it. They also know how, kind of inconsistent the spring semester is in terms of that content. So you can take it during the spring because you think you're gonna be fresh, but what's gonna be the content? Well, how much information you're gonna get versus how much information those kids get, that fresh start, fresh mind in the fall, gets. So that's
And a lot of
another
kids-
thing that you're not gonna measure.
Yeah, Mr. Smith?
Well, also my question is too, in terms of setting up these 4x4 classes, aren't all principals over the master schedules? Who does the master schedules?
I do the master schedule at my school, but I
Right.
can't speak to any other district school, I'm not sure how that
Assistant
rolls.
principal, could be a team that works on it.
Right, but my thing about it is, right, at the end of the day, the principal is held responsible for the school, correct? So the principal is over the master schedule because I'm sure the principal gives the final yeah or the final thumbs up on the master schedule. So I think that's something that maybe we will need to hear from administrators on too, because also we need to make sure that they're understanding along their scheduling of these things that occur. And these are things that were brought to us in importance too, so that these may be things that we may want to address moving further into doing our master schedules. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you know, we all can talk about this, but the principal actually does the master schedule. So, you know, under the direction of the superintendent. So that's something that that I don't think that we've been talking about, and that's very important to this conversation. That's a big piece to this component of the conversation.
Tony, you were going to say?
Well, I was just gonna say that what the data shows and the trends is that there are more kids taking AP exams than ever before. You know, so it's not only the cream of the creme anymore. More kids are challenging themselves. Schools are making it available. They're not charging for the courses.
Right.
You know, teachers are encouraging, so.
College is expensive.
Yes, and also, you know, the cost of college, kids are going in, you know, with a full year of freshman under their belt because they've taken some of these AP courses.
Right.
So, you know, and again, I think we should use the data that we have. It's hard and rather than just our own personal, you know, way we've always done things, you know. So that's, I think, part of the challenge here is to justify it so that when we sit here 2 years from now. And I think a lot of schools are doing 2-year calendars now to raise the question of, you know, planning for, they're putting out two-year calendars. So in 2 years, we know what our calendar is going to be already.
Right, and so that's why, you know, the board didn't approve of this upcoming school year in 4 weeks until, I think it was, what, March?
February, March, something.
Yeah,
It was
and
late.
so that's why we're having this conversation now, that hopefully,
And that's why I went ahead and created the 2020, 122,
Yeah.
because we believe as a committee, you want to have 2 years. Heck,
Yeah.
if you let us, we put 3 out, but.
The world spins on 2 years ahead of time.
At
You know?
least, yeah.
You can see who the Yankees are playing in 2025.
right. Ms. Robine?
At this point, I think to kind of conclude this discussion, I don't feel like I would be ready to make any decisions. What I would really like to see are these pieces of data, the EOC results from this year, so we can compare, you know, we had them for last year and how kids did first, you know, the shorter and the second, and the number of early graduates. And, you know, I think those are important pieces for us to look at to see if there's a trend, you know, if it continues from last year, because like Tricia said, when we saw that data last year, as educators, we both went like, oh, this isn't what we thought it was gonna be. So, but then again, like Mel said, that spring semester from being in schools, there's a different, the focus isn't quite there in the spring as it is in the fall. It's just the way it is.
You're making an argument.
No,
You're making an argument.
Well, then look at the data, Tony.
Right.
Okay.
You're making an argument for another scheduling model, though.
Oh, well,
That is what I wanted to suggest, is that in addition, that we revisit exactly why the high schools are running on a 4x4, when there are ways we can accommodate registration in college classes. They might be linked to, you have to take a fall and a spring class because your high school classes aren't exactly ending at the same time. But what is the rationale? Is it effective? Is there a better model?
That is an excellent question, and that is certainly something I think that absolutely needs to be looked at, and I had some conversations with people about that several months ago. I don't know the rationale why it went to 4x4, but let's absolutely, I mean, and if you said, I didn't realize that, I mean, because I don't remember.
Back and forth.
Back and forth.
I'll
back
tell you
and
the
forth.
rationale that I was given over.
Right.
It was driven on the K courses. In order to be a completer, which is important for a report card, a career and technology completer, you need to complete a certain number of courses, which sometimes need prerequisites that you can't start the first one as a freshman. And so by having a fall and spring semester, you can knock 2 of them out within the same academic year. But the logical solution would be would be have students sign up for 2 per year and have just those classes run on a 4x4, allowing our academic classes the freedom to have the whole school year and test in the spring and not have the other makeup days be a constant burden and stress for the fall semester.
Well, also, if my memory serves me correctly too as well, I believe that it was up to the principals on whether they want to run 4x4 or whether they wanted to do it differently. Because if I remember correctly, certain schools like Beaver High School, I believe last year they have like freshman academy. They have certain things that run a little differently. Am I correct?
There are some year-long classes like remediate, are there not some year-long?
Well,
Is that the
they're
same as
2
a-
semesters.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
in a math class the whole year,
Right.
where it's kind of a little bit like pre-algebra in the fall.
And, yeah,
And then the course that's attached to the EOC is in the spring to give those students a whole year to try to catch up.
right. So
Um,
there are certain circumstances where it does, but most of the master schedule is built on a 4x4.
And Tricia,
Well, also, I was just in that, and my theory of bringing that up is to say that I believe that the authority to do 4x4 or to change up was given to the principals, and I think every principal had the authority to do it however they want to. Maybe that's something that we need to maybe look at, maybe revisit and see that's something that we need to have maybe a one solid shot as a district versus giving versus allowing principals to do things differently. And
Is there any high school that's not 4x4? I don't
They
think so.
all are.
I think they all
well,
are.
they all are, but
levels of modification.
Exactly. There are different levels of modification, and maybe we need to run them consistent on one, and also that would also help us with our data in this, and to also understand where we're at and throughout the schools with in terms of the achievement gap, how a school is moving, and how north of the broad moving, and how south of the broad is moving. Because when you have all these different components, you're not really able to get an accurate measure on the achievement gap because of the fact that you may have different programs going on here in this school here, and that you may not have going on, but then you're comparing them all and you're talking about attacking the achievement gap. That's not working.
Mr. Campbell?
But that was the premise behind the 4x4 argument from the start, that was gonna make the individual schools a lot more flexible, but it was driven towards the academic achievers. It was driven, and
for your graduation rates is what I recall.
yeah,
Is that what you recall?
Yeah, driven toward the academic achievement and graduation rate. I mean, flexibility in terms of achievement. So they're looking for what we can do in terms of the best product out of any child. And so 4x4 was driven, was out of the models. 4x4 was a chosen model because academically you could service both IB, AP, and have a flex schedule for some of the underachievers. And that was what drove the argument. And Dr. Moss was pushing that argument with his entire agenda surrounding where we were going in terms of schools. We were coming out of AB, and that was the last system that I taught him. But like Tina said, we've been back and forth from 6 courses a day, 7 courses a day, with a certain amount of minutes, to 4x4, to AB, to a mock AB. So yeah, it's the idea is, gathering the data, and we haven't been good at that.
That's right.
We haven't been good at looking at the track record to see what worked and what didn't work. Before we figure out whether it's working or not, we've been switching into another model.
Right.
No sustaining data, but just let's try it. And before that works, let's go to another model.
Right.
So that is the madness behind our methods.
So that I think should absolutely, we will address looking at what the data tells us about the scheduling itself. So Mr. Bennett, what if
And also
we-
some consistency across the board as well, as in maybe everyone on the same page, so that we can get a great measure, because I'm going to continue to push the achievement gap, because that's the board's #1, so therefore we can actually be able to measure a great grasp of where we're at as a district.
Dr. Truss, can I ask you, what you described in math in like the academy is what the research would say to do? To give the kids that aren't quite ready for algebra, give them a semester of that, get them up to speed and then put them into an Algebra 1 class. So I have a couple questions. One, I'm wondering what our results look like for those kids, and if the other high schools are offering that as well to Mr. Smith, because that is like something that, the best practice, that is a best practice that's out there.
Right. And I think this conversation is great when we get to it. We're kind of veering away from the calendar itself, but those are absolutely, Mr. Smith's point, your point, you know, we should really address with the 4x4. So Mr. Bennett, we're obviously, it's, you know, we need some of this data back to make, but maybe it would be by October.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say people wait on the calendar, so they're, you know,
Right.
but I think doing this deep dive is really important.
Yeah.
And then that way you can be real succinct in what you're deciding. Because if we do, like you said, we get to do a 2 or 3 year calendar, once we do it, you try to change it, you think they're mad about makeup days?
Yeah.
Change the calendar for 3 years away.
Right.
Because they will have told you they've already booked the Royal Caribbean cruise for wherever, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, great. Well, then we will revisit this, you know, maybe at one of the September academic committee meetings.
We should, hopefully, the data I think is back, but it's embargoed, is what. It's embargoed, so as soon as the data is released, we should be able to get that.
Okay, great. Did you want to say something?
The only piece, and this is a complete sidebar to anything that's been said, but as the principal of a K-8 school in this district, spring break being Heritage Week is really tough on our young learners. That is a long haul from Christmas break to spring break. And when you've got 5-year-olds in your building, I'm just telling you now, that is a tough. They are working hard and they are giving us everything they've got every single day. But when spring break doesn't start until the 15th of April, and they have been in school since January 2nd or January 4th, that is a really difficult time of the year for our young learners. And having had a high schooler now, I can tell you it's pretty tough at the high school level too, just to get them to buckle down that long haul. But as the principal of 80 spectacular kindergartners, that is a long haul for some of our youngest learners. And again, I have the benefit of having family that live on the Heritage Golf Course down there. I grew up in Augusta, so I can speak to you all day about the Masters phenomenon that goes on in Augusta, and spring break in Augusta. But if I had one thing that I would encourage us beyond the high school piece, would be to really try to think creatively about how to get our kids, if not a full week, some extended time to decompress before April 15th of the year, because that is a long and very difficult 4 months for some of our very youngest learners.
Right.
That's a tough haul.
It is, and I was also going to say it's a very long haul for teachers, and I'd like to see the absentee rate, the data, and it shows.
It is tough. It's just.
Oh, it's, I'm sure we would find many mental health days taken in March, because it goes on and on forever. So that is absolutely part of that, I think, should be looked at, even just a.
Somebody said we can do year round. That'll get.
There we go, let's do Okay, so we will commit to having this on the agenda again in September, okay? All right. The next one is we're going to look at the uniform grading policy, and that would be Ms. Cartledge.
And Ms. Gibson was supposed to be here also with us, but.
And Ms. Henderson, is she?
Yeah, I chose Terry to so of course they didn't. We wanted to show you the uniform grading policy revisions webinar first. Ms. Dixon, would you pull that up? Would you? Oh, she's supposed to be here. Well, anyway, could you show the webinar, please, Molly?
Which webinar?
The UGP revisions webinar. That would be helpful for everybody to see it, to give us an overview of what the changes were.
So wait.
Somebody turn the radio on.
What is this right here now? What is this right? What is this?
We're going over the administrative regulations, the uniform grading policy, and there's a webinar from those, from the Department of Education. Yeah, that explains.
Because they've mandated some changes.
Okay.
Ms. Irvine, have you been keeping up with the Charlotte Mecklenburg superintendent thing?
No.
They, he stepped down.
Oh, really?
Clayton Wilcox, they don't know the reason. Yeah. I've been keeping up with it because I still have a couple of friends in that newsroom over there, but.
Okay, we're gonna take the ladies' room,
Do you know
gentlemen
Angela?
room break for about 4
Yes.
minutes.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
get this
Or
started.
Andos Homes now, I think, or,
Oh,
I don't know.
oh, Ann and I worked together when we were there. We were principals together, and then I moved and she
Gotcha.
moved up and became assistant superintendent.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to do more education reporting when I was there, but I mean, Andos Homes had that on lock. She had that for years and years and years, so it's hard to get in, but I really enjoyed the meetings I got to go to.
Yeah.
But now I saw that and I texted my old editor and I was like, yikes, because they have a brand new reporter on that education beat too, and I was like, that has to be rough for your first month on the job. It's that whole resignation scenario. But
So just resigned?
he, I think, was asked to step down by their board, but the circumstances around it are still kind of murky. So I can email you the links if you want, but
Sure.
it seems like a whole thing.
Yeah.
It's not commercialized.
Okay.
It's university around.
Okay. You know, I don't remember hearing about Kate. Being a mover and a factor in determining about.
Last for a few minutes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for this.
Oh, you're very
Yeah,
welcome.
appreciate that. This is very helpful. We'll start again as soon as Ms. Carpledge comes back, but, this uniform grading policy,
So this-
it basically is administrative regulations.
So is this the districts or is this the state?
Well, this would be, well, Wendy's gonna explain it, but this includes some of what the state mandates to be in our administrative regulations. Okay, and it's the administrative regulations that guide the policy. So, as I understand it, okay? Hi, how are you? Thank you for your help. What are you having the Chinese study? For the, February 6th? No. That's the 29th, but I thought we yesterday. did send back some feedback.
Feedback.
Yeah, we did.
I saw there was feedback, but I'm see how they're different.
And this is the I'm not gonna reply at all.
Yeah.
No, you've done it. Ms. Cartledge, is it, I mean, it would be illuminating, but is it something that we,
Well, when I met with Ms. Henderson and Monique Dixon yesterday, they said that they wanted you all to see it, so. But since it's not available, it may be in a few minutes. You can go back, but we had no problem accessing it yesterday because we took this memo
right.
from the State Department, we just clicked on this and it opened right up, so I don't know why.
Okay, so could we start perhaps with, and then if Molly
Yeah.
can get it going, we could always
And
stop.
from what Molly said, Ms. Dixon won't be with us today.
Well, that was
so
Henderson.
She won't be with us either, but we can go ahead and
Okay,
proceed.
great.
So what we did was, we took I want to welcome everybody here, and I appreciate y'all's input. So what we did was, we were, Ms. Henderson was sent revisions to the uniform grading policy. And we took those revisions from the State Department and we incorporated it into this AR for grading and assessment systems. And I wanted to point this out, Ms. Dixon said this yesterday, and it's important for y'all to be aware of this, is that we have the new scale as well as the old scale, because Ms. Dixon was saying that there are some seniors that grading scale would still apply to them, and then there were some students that repeated grades, so we thought it would be important to have the old one in.
Okay.
Even though there's a
But we'll
new-
get to that, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that
Okay,
was just something somebody
so
said.
this is the AR, the administrative regulation, and you keep referring to the uniform grading policy. So is the AR the same as the policy?
No, but let me try to make it clear, because I didn't make it clear. So there was a memorandum that was issued by the state, you don't mind if I use it? I gave my colleague. There was a memorandum issued from the South Carolina Department of Education from Dr. Sabrina Moore. It went to all the district superintendents and principals. And the State Board of Education on May 14th, 2019, approved revisions to the South Carolina Uniform Grading Policy. So that is,
That's from 2017.
That's 2017.
That can't be it.
so,
45 minutes.
no,
Yeah.
this is a little short, it was 18 minutes long. That's okay, Molly, don't worry.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there were revisions that the State Board of Education approved to the state South Carolina Uniform Grading Policy. So those revisions were, as this memo states, designed to clarify key grading policies and procedures, and they are to be implemented beginning with this academic school year. So, we took the South Carolina Uniform Grading Policy revisions, which are very long, and took those changes and incorporated them into this administrative regulation for the Beaufort County School District. We also received from the South Carolina School Board Association some guidance and some suggestions of things that should be in the AR. So we put those into this document as well.
Okay.
But what wasn't in this was that Ms. Dixon suggested that we have the prior grading scale,
Right.
because we have some repeaters and there were some
Right.
seniors this year.
Okay.
So that was not in this, but it was something that she suggested yesterday. And I also appreciated talking to you on the phone yesterday,
Yes.
getting some input, so.
Okay, so
And
do
Ms.
you,
Robine, thank you for your input too.
do you want to start and just go through section 1, and then we'll just go through it, or how would you like to proceed?
Whatever's the pleasure of the committee. You just, if you want, you just review it with me, I'm glad to.
Okay,
Whatever.
well, I know we had quite a bit of discussion on the phone yesterday at a conference call, and I think it would be beneficial if, I'm sure not everyone's had a chance to read it, other than the 3 of us on the committee, but.
Right, as well as our guests that are present
Right.
here today, so I'd be more
Right.
than happy to do that. So the purpose of this administrative regulation is this reg reviews the superintendent's expectations for grading and reporting of student academic progress. And report cards are issued every 9 academic weeks, as noted on the school calendar. There is an also interim.
Can I just,
Yeah.
this is part of the conversation we had yesterday on the phone.
Yeah.
And this is part of this is the administrative regulation, which then informs our practices, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't get report cards every 9 weeks because our first semester is only 17 weeks. And we don't get report cards every 9 weeks, and, I mean, do you see, remember the conversation
Well, so
we had?
that was, that was not brought to my attention yesterday, but if this
No,
is.
it's something I
And if
missed.
this is
but-
something that report cards are not issued every 9 academic weeks, then we need to make a revision.
Well, I'm just,
Because-
see, you know the conversation we had yesterday, further down in this document about the continuous references to 9 weeks? My concern is that
Well,
if this.
what we did with that was with your direction, is that we changed.
Suggestion?
Well,
Yeah.
suggestion. You are an academic person. You have worked in the area of academia for many years. I respect what you all say, because that is not, I've never
And
been
that's
a
why I wish Ms.
teacher.
Henderson was here.
So since I've never been a teacher, I mean,
Yeah.
we've got Mel here too. For example, yesterday you pointed that out, that it's quarter, semester, and year long.
Well, that's our current practice.
And that's our current practice, and so that needs to be in our AR.
Well, and so I missed 1B. I was, when we were in our discussion yesterday. So I just have a concern, and I don't know, Mr. Campbell, Ms. Robine, how you feel about it, but I have a concern that our administrative regulations use a specific time frame that in practice we don't use. You know, so, okay,
Okay,
so
so
I
what
don't
I need to know is, since I'm not a teacher, I need to know when our progress reports issued.
report cards are issued.
When our report cards issued.
Four
Four times a year. But it's not such sweet little 9
But
week
it may
intervals
not be a
anymore.
specific
Right.
9 weeks,
Right.
but the progress reports are
Issued.
issued
Four
four
times
times a year. But it may be 9 weeks, 8 weeks.
It is.
10 weeks, 9 weeks. Is
Because-
that right? I
because
mean,
of the
that's the
calendar.
professional practice,
Under-
but your commitment to the professional
Well,
practice
and
that
the
you're gonna do
progress
for a year.
report says at approximately the midway point of each grading period.
That's
Yes.
Does
correct.
that sound right?
Yes,
Okay.
that sounds
So
correct.
so report cards are issued,
Four
should say
times.
4 times a year?
At
Well,
the
I think-
end of the grading period, probably be,
At the
you
end
wanna
of the
use the
grading period.
language
Okay.
that,
I think that
but,
is just
but open,
much,
but keep it,
yeah, thank you, Mr. Campbell, I think that's
Flexible.
not
Yeah.
At the end of the academic grading period, does that sound right?
yeah,
Okay.
At the end of each.
of each
Grading
academic.
period.
which, yeah.
At the end of each academic grading period.
That also gives you flexibility that
Yes.
if you ever wanted to go to a trimester or if you want, right? You wouldn't have
Yes.
to rewrite all of your
Yeah.
policies
Absolutely.
because they just say that
Right,
you're
right.
right.
Okay,
Right.
at the end of each academic grading period.
Mhm.
So are those days not noted on the calendar?
As noted on the they are.
Are they noted?
They are
Yeah.
noted on the calendar
Yeah.
For
every
this
time.
upcoming year, it would be 8 weeks plus 2 days
Yeah,
for the
see,
first quarter.
so
Yeah.
that was my concern when I saw this last week, was that we have tied ourselves into these particular, and
Okay.
also Ms. Henderson said yesterday that this is reviewed annually. Well, this has been so it's time to change it, because this has
Because-
not been our practice.
Because this AR was
November
last
17th.
reviewed in November of 2017.
Okay.
So it missed on the work plan, isn't there, aren't the ARs supposed to come before us when we do our work plan?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
let's
I think
let's
All
make
of
note
the
of
ARs,
that.
because there's, there
Yeah,
are lots of
yeah.
them.
It must rotate through
I
though.
thought the work plan was in regards to the PEs.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it is.
Performance
So-
expectations.
Okay.
Okay.
But these ARs are supposed to be revised whenever there's a change in policy or
Right.
statutes, or just like we did that for
Okay.
DACO, because
Right.
there was a
Yes.
new statute.
Okay.
But it hasn't been revised since November 2017, so.
And everyone, this is pretty lengthy, so I think that to facilitate this, because this will need to go in front of the board on August 6th as, just a
Information.
And you state, this has to be ready by the time school starts, so we've got a really narrow window
No.
here.
Yes. So we'll
so-
say on number 1B, school shall issue report cards at the end of each academic grading period on the days noted on the annual BCSD school calendar for students.
Love it.
That's
Yeah.
good? Perfect.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Everybody give your feedback. please.
Okay.
Okay, now.
So I don't think we have time to go through every single
No,
one,
no,
but
no.
someone might, there might be something that
There's
jumps out at
The
you.
other ones that jumped out at you.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, I can tell you what's jumped out at me.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so if you go to 2, or we're ready to move on, or?
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Is this right? Teachers are expected to contact parents when a student's grade drops below a C/70.
Yes,
Okay,
that is true.
okay.
Right, Bernadette? Yes?
Okay.
Dr. Lombarski, that was our practice.
That is
That's
what,
what-
at
thank
a
you.
building level,
Okay.
we're
Right, at a building
expected to
level.
do,
But this is district
Why
level.
would the butt?
from a
district.
teacher's standpoint, if you provide parents with constant access through Power
know.
School, it becomes for some
Laborious.
teachers a very every time, and the grade is a constantly revolving thing. Every time it drops below 70, you're supposed to send an email. That could take up every minute of your planning period.
I know, I know.
So
This
that's,
has been the practice for several years.
that's what's on paper.
That is what is on paper, yeah.
Is
And
it realistic?
Well,
Well, so-
if you can put this at a quarter or a semester.
I don't know that
At
this
the
is,
progress report or at the grading period, end of the grading period. Or at the half of the semester, halfway through the semester. Instead of each time it dropped
Or
between
the
the 70.
first time it dropped below a 70. I'd be more than happy to reach out to a parent if their child drops below there. But if it goes back up and it drops back down again, I mean, in this roller coaster, I could be expected to contact 20 to 30 parents
right,
multiple times a
Yeah,
week as it goes up and down, as your grade is a moving entity.
But definitely at the,
I think that was the intent, that, you know, a student, you see a student dropping, you'll notify the parents.
Yeah.
I don't think, yeah, you know, a student dropping below 70 was a danger zone. And that C70 is adjusted to what it used to be, but 70 it was a danger zone of getting to failure, which is really the lower limits of D now in our system, but then 70 was a lower limit. And so I think that you're right in terms of the intent. The parents just want to know that my child's not doing well. And that's the intent of this, is that you're alerting the parents, look, he's dropping, you need to do some things to intervene, and that might create dialogue. That's what the idea is.
it is such a well-taken point, especially in our now Power School accessibility and that parents can track it daily and so on. And I don't mean this as a cop-out or but I truly believe that without our secondary instructor here, without a chief instructional services officer at this point, that I would hesitate to make any huge changes that affect everything. But I've just starred that, and I would like to revisit that without a doubt, because Power School has changed things. However, not every parent has access to that, so, I know, and so that's gotta be part of that conversation, but can you live with, I don't think at this juncture we should, without a CI, without a chief instructional services officer to weigh in on this, but we will come back to it, okay?
And I think it should say at the scheduled times, shouldn't it? Yes.
Okay, yep,
Okay.
keep going,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's probably, that's good.
Anything, so I think, Dr. Gauze, did you have something on page 1 here?
Yep.
Yeah, where are you?
Okay.
Under 2, one of the key
2,
things I know,
okay.
under 2, I noticed, the grading scale changed between the 2015-16 calendar school year and the 2016-17. And so the way it's written here, I don't think it's good, because you've got after 2016 under B, and then if you flip to the next page, you have prior to 2016. Okay, so then what happened in 2016?
So we
So the
say-
important thing is really to put the academic
Okay,
year
so
there.
after the 2015-2016 school year, is that right? 2015?
Yeah,
Like this.
or you could say beginning with the 2016-17 school year. You could do it
Okay.
either way.
Oh, yeah, maybe it's beginning with the 2016-17 school year, that sounds better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
okay.
other question I have that also came up with this, because that needs to be fixed in several places in
Okay,
here.
beginning with the 2016-2017 school year, okay.
Well,
Well, and
So then, as part of that,
This is exactly-
you'll see that's in here a few times, you're gonna have to
Okay.
fix it.
Okay, fix in other places, okay.
Yeah, but the other thing is, what about summer school? Is that considered to be the end of the prior year, or is it be considered the beginning of the next year? Because that's gonna
Yeah.
matter with this.
Isn't it the
Well,
end of the?
It is, I mean, those are students because of the prior year.
Okay.
You know, they
So-
go to summer school because of their results during the school year.
So,
It just
okay,
ended.
so,
Okay.
Are you
yeah,
saying
so that has to be
absolutely?
maybe delineated in here.
Okay. and
Or
then
maybe
I'll-
it is if you say, if it's
To
beginning
the
with the
school year.
2016-17 school year, you've covered it, I guess.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fix that there on B, and then when you go to the next page, then I'll say prior to the 2015-2016 school year. Right?
Are you saying no?
Well, I'm
No,
just,
it would be prior.
Or beginning with the 2015-26, no, beginning with the 2016-2017
This wording
school
came from
year.
the state.
this,
Is that right?
this
Yeah,
wording
it's
came
from the state.
exactly from the state. I've
Yeah,
got
I
the
don't
memo
know.
from Molly Spearman, I
Well, to
pulled
me,
it
it's
up,
confusing.
and it's exactly from the state. So, I mean, maybe we leave the state wording in parentheses,
But,
define it for ourselves.
For 2016.
Just so we're in compliance with the state if they were to say.
That's true if they came
Yeah,
back
yeah.
and audited us,
Yeah,
okay?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
But I just
Okay.
noticed, to me, that seemed,
So we'll leave after 2016 and then parentheses put the 2016-2017 school year?
you're gonna say beginning with the, right? You're gonna say,
And then,
beginning with the.
yeah, put it in parentheses instead of,
Right.
still make it say after 2016.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are 2 seats open here if anyone wants to move up.
Yeah,
So
it
you're
might
saying
be
not
easier
jumping, it might
here.
be easier than jumping in paper, so feel free to move up.
3 ladies, so I'm not fighting it.
Okay, so then I have to say that same thing, prior to 2016, parentheses, beginning with
So
the
that would be,
2016.
that would be, say,
Beginning with the 2016-2017 school year.
no, or prior
Prior to
to,
20.
it would really be from 2015-16 school years and backwards, or,
Okay.
right?
Okay,
And earlier.
Yes.
Okay.
And earlier. Maybe that's what
okay,
you'd
that
say.
sounds better, thank you. That sounds better, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we got this, all right. Okay, there we go. All right,
We just want to add the year before, okay,
yeah, okay, we got it.
and after.
And I'll make these edits and send them back out, and y'all can proofread it, okay?
So, again, down in number 3, each of the 2 9-week grades.
Okay, now, my concern with number 3 was the final grade calculations, because that's what really concerned me about the final grade calculations, using just the first and the second semesters and taking the average. Whereas for the, and then it's in paper here, but our practice is that teachers have the discretion of using the final exam, well, what we normally call a final exam as a regular test grade. And then the teacher has the discretion of counting the test grade once or counting the test grade twice. And
Where
if
does it
that's-
say that? I mean, is that
It
in the
doesn't say
regs
that in
somewhere?
paper, but that's
No, I'm
our
just saying,
practice.
is it in some regulation?
I don't know where it is, but that's what I was told. When I came back to the district this year, when I would do my calculations for my final grades, I was told that we take the 2 semesters and take the average of those, and that's how you get the final grade. And I had the discretion of using the test grade once or twice, but it was not considered to be a final grade, it was a regular assessment. And that disturbed me, because when you think about other situations where we use the grade point average as graduation lineup, for salutatorian, valedictorian, any point where we use the GPA for calculating or determining status of our students, that is impacted, because I may use it once in my course, but somebody else may count their test grade for the same course that I'm teaching twice at another school. So there is no consistency, there is no fairness, there is a lot of subjectivity in this practice.
That would be exactly my point. Again, I've said that before. It has to be uniform
Right.
among all the schools.
Everyone has-
That is-
it has to be
exactly.
the same.
That's
You're
not
right.
fair.
Isn't
And,
Well,
I'm sorry, Ms. Campbell.
but this doesn't really, you want more information added in.
Yeah, I
But
want it
this
to
don't
be
say anything
clearly
about
defined.
the-
That doesn't say
the-
anything about
The teacher's
the
grading,
discretion.
yeah, policy, it just says how those averages are totaled into a final average. But you wanna say something about the assessments also here, or is that gonna come up somewhere else? See,
Talks about
how
formative
teachers,
and
yeah,
summative
the
assessment.
uniformity of the program of what teachers do to get this have to be defined somewhere else, not necessarily here, I think.
Yeah, but see, the practice was before that we followed the same as the courses that had it in the course. There was a final exam, and it counted 20% of the final grade.
Yeah, but that's no longer the
But
practice.
see, that's no longer the practice, but then now you allowing subjectivity to come into this process
Because of the 50-50.
because you giving the teacher the discretion as to how much weight the assessment, the final assessment is for that course.
And so this is what you were told at your school.
Yes.
And have you discussed this with any?
Well, I spoke
What
to,
school are you, what school?
I'm at Battery Creek High School. I spoke to my department head and then I went to my principal.
Right.
Because this was not known to me as a
Right.
common practice. I was always under the impression that we followed the same final grade calculation for the EOC courses, that your final exam was 20% of your final grade.
Got it.
And see, when you go back and you say back here under 1B, that, no, with this 70, if a child makes below a 60 in the first semester, then that child is in danger of failing for the rest of the year, because a 60 and a 60, it doesn't jive when you calculate the final grade. So you have to contact parents at least after the first semester, because that child is gonna fail the rest, no matter what they do for the second half of the semester. But then to have a practice, whereas you giving the teacher the discretion as to the weight for the regular assessment now in these higher level courses, to me that's too much subjectivity, and it's not fair. And anything that is being used with the grade point average is being skewed state district wide.
Dr. Mbarski, do you have any comment on this, the practice, or you only teach EOCs?
No, I teach an AP biology class, and we had not been told about counting the final twice. That wasn't something that we were told as being an option for our weighting in our particular school. But every year it does come up where there's still an idea that the final should count as 10% of the fourth quarter. And so I think there have been different practices in different buildings that you are very correct in saying does have impacts in
Sure it does.
GPA that I think should be looked at more carefully and tried to bring into more uniform alignment. I think you make a good point, and I don't even think it's being it's being dealt with the same way building by building. I don't think the same options are.
I think what she's saying is even in the same building, a teacher might do something different.
That teacher the same
That
course.
really is very concerning.
But even, you could even argue that if you don't offer the same final exam within the same course, then you could be doing the same thing by giving easy questions, even if you didn't count it any differently.
Well, our plan years ago was to make sure that we're offering the same final exam in the same course.
No, we did.
And try to uniform everything we do. And that includes counting the assessments and monitoring the assessments at the same time. But, how do we legislate that and how do we monitor that is another thing, And I think that's instructional services myself, making sure that the department chairs are giving the directives that are uniform throughout the district. If we write it in here, that would mean we have to write in what the test scores, how many tests have to be given, etc.
Yeah.
Because if we,
Well, Mr. Kim, I just noticed there's another administrative regulation we're gonna need to look at, this IS 44 test and examinations for further information on exams and testing, so we haven't looked at that one.
So page 3 of
All right. Again, I'm gonna go back to my comment about not having a chief instructional services officer at this time. Fortunately, the end final exam won't be given until probably at least December, and we have a little bit of time. So I have just written this down as one of the first things to speak to Rodriguez about?
We really don't have time because you have to lay out your grading policies in your
You do
syllabus,
on
which you need to
course.
turn out
You're right.
at the beginning of the year.
You're right.
Well, I was gonna say, even though we don't have a chief instructional leader, however, we do have department, we do have a person over elementary ed, and we do have a person over high school,
Right, so I said, I'm sorry, Ms. Henderson's not here.
Right, no, when I'm saying, my responses to you, when you said that we don't have an instructional leader, but I just was gonna say that we do have those people, and that hopefully, I'm hoping that they will be able to speak to these situations as they occur, even though that we don't have an instructional leader, because we do have people who are playing those valid roles and.
Right, so I have written down right here, speak with Rodriguez immediately about this issue.
Right,
Okay.
right, I mean,
So-
right,
This is
and
what it's
that's,
supposed to be.
Yeah, because it's spelled out here, so
It
the
is spelled
question
out here, I
is,
mean,
is
Is
it
it being
being,
implemented?
is it being
Enforced.
implemented and are
Consistently throughout the
consistently?
district
Because
and
Being
all.
Well, you-
communicated and implemented.
Because it's spelled out
Okay,
here.
one at a time.
Yeah.
It is
I'm
spelled-
sorry,
Yeah. What's your Kathy?
Kathy, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just
What are you
saying, it's,
talking about,
what's currently here in the AR tells exactly how the grade should be calculated. So, but the question is it being followed consistently?
right.
This is,
Okay,
but how you determine how much the final exam counts
Right.
Right, that's not
isn't,
spelled
and
out.
that isn't spelled out
And
here.
that needs to be
Right.
spelled out.
The question is the 50-50. Her question is 50-50, not the end of course. The question is
Okay, she's-
50% semester grades, and how that last semester is determined, and how they count the final test on
Yeah.
that, and that semester.
Because I
That's what her
understand
question
20%.
is. And it's not spelled out here
No.
because it's not uniform, and I can, as an instructor, it might be uniform according to the departments in the schools.
And of course,
And that should be definitely the standard, that everybody in the school is doing the same thing, test-wise, and the same kind of test, the same number of assessments, etc., because that's how you want to determine the students in that school. But other schools may, the department chairs in math, for example, might say that, I want everybody to give at least 3 assessments. And at Hilton Head High, and somebody might say 2 assessments. But each assessment have to be the same assessments for the teacher that's teaching the same courses.
And to expand upon your point, sir, again, I'm at a K-8 school, so starting in 7th grade, we're doing Carnegie Unit courses. So it's not only dialogue amongst your 5 high schools, but also amongst your middle schools, all of whom are now doing algebra, geometry, English 1, Spanish 1, we've got French 1, and so just ensuring that continuity is there, even for your instructors at the middle school level who are teaching those high school courses. And again, their structures may be different because there may only be one algebra teacher in that particular school. So it's not a whole department, right? It's one. And so ensuring that those people are also, so to speak, getting your memo and are, because those students are wrapping into your GPAs at the high school level. They are becoming your graduates, they are. And so whether they're taking it in 7th grade or 10th grade,
Yeah.
there should be some continuity there.
So that's a finer thing for the instructional leader.
Absolutely, yeah.
I was just gonna say, and this is a very important conversation, just because of the fact that you have kids who are competing and they're using GPAs, and we make sure this is a fair across the board to actually get in college and get scholarships. So this is very important.
So
And
we
it's
have
not
to-
a new conversation.
how
You know,
much
it
the
is-
final exam counts as part of this, right?
What I find really strange about this is that if you read this, this is under 3. So it says, any semester or yearly final exam, non-state, i.e. non-EOC,
Right.
will be calculated into the concurrent grading periods. That means your final in a course that didn't have EOC would only be calculated into the 4th quarter grade. But then it goes on to say, a yearly or final grade is determined by averaging the 2 semester grades unless the state end of course test is given, in which case that counts 20% of the final grade, and they say that the two semesters count 80% and the final 20%. So it seems to me that why don't we do the same thing for the non-EOC courses and just make it all the same?
Well, that was your point, it used to be.
Yeah, that could
It
be
used
fair,
to
and then
be.
that would be fair.
And then that seems like there's
Right.
no,
You think that's?
you know, it's odd that why would we have it, the final only be factored into the fourth quarter? That makes no sense. The final is the whole course.
I think,
I'm not a teacher.
I know,
though.
the key to that, no, I agree with that, is really that finals for every course should be consistent. They should
Yeah.
be the same. And that's, because that's where you get into somebody
Yes.
giving the easy final
10%?
and the, you know, really,
There's only one med board, man.
so that's, but,
Yeah, but that's not, I don't think they're looking at it the way they intended.
okay. Maybe,
They intended, let's say it's a semester, 4x4, second semester. And it's not a end of course type thing. And what they're saying is, if you give a finals for that second part of the semester, the final quarter, that final grade should not affect the first part of the semester's standing grade. Because there are two grades you get. You get a first semester, third quarter, if you want to look at it that way. The first part of the second semester and the second part of the second semester. And they're saying the first part is done and stamped. You can't go back and affect that 80% that person earned the first part of that semester. Even though the final he might bum out, the final is only for the second semester part.
But if we,
It's not
That's-
for the whole, it's not like a
It's
cumulative
not a
test.
cumulative test. That's what they're saying. That's exactly what they're saying here. And I think what she's saying is that sometimes teachers count that final as two parts, as two tests, not necessarily going back to the first semester, but two tests that second semester and skews the grade. But, you know,
Well,
but
I understand what
yeah,
you're saying, but
that's
to
not
me-
a continued thing. That final that you can make it that, I'm sure, if you're talking, but what that will do, hold up the first semester's grade or count it as only 40%. And that would mandate every course gets an end of course exam. Not necessarily statewide official, but it would mandate that every course now getting the end of course exam, 40, 40, 20.
right, yeah, that's what I
But
mean.
now, this is written 50-50.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other 50 is determined, and teachers may not give us substantial finals with that 50. The final test, you're thinking it's the final as if, when we went to school, final of the year, that might just be the final test of 2 tests this semester.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
yeah, but the end of course exams, they are to demonstrate the competency that the
Of the
child
whole
developed over the
course.
whole year. So
Right.
that becomes, now if Tony goofed off first quarter, second quarter, and then third quarter, fourth quarter decided to buckle down, why would I get my 15 from the first quarter affect what I've learned throughout the year? Because my end of course exam shows that I've really not only have competency, I have mastery. You know, so it depends on how we want to use the grade. Do we want to use it as a punitive, or do we want to use it as an assessment?
Yes, that's
of,
substantial assessment,
you know,
yeah.
what so I think these are two debates, I think, right now. One is the process, and one is how we
Right.
value.
And until we go to standards-based grading, where, which is.
But your end of course exams are your state, because that's across the state, correct?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
every
end
kid
of
takes the
course
same, yeah.
Right.
So
That's-
if we want to
that's it.
value that 10% or 50%, that's, you know, that's the local decision, but the test does show that what they're expected to do standard-based for that course.
Right, right, but
No,
it would be a much.
It's not local, Tony.
No, some say it's the state, but
Yeah.
the percentage. we
Percentage
wanna-
of state too.
The percentage that we want to weigh it though, I mean, if I'm just using it as an
No.
argument, the state says it's gonna be
Yeah,
20%.
state
Yes, the
says you have to
state
be
says.
20%,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
state dictates
Yeah,
that,
state
yeah.
dictate that.
Only for courses that have state mandated
Correct,
UC.
yes, yes.
So I
So
think
this is
the
really a
question then
secondary issue
becomes,
again.
You know,
Well,
are you
and
going,
those- Well, yeah.
Yeah,
are you going to implement high stakes testing where it doesn't, where the state isn't dictating it.
Right.
Right.
Right, is in the larger conversation,
Yeah.
which
That's the
is then are you
conversation,
going
right.
to introduce high stakes testing where the state isn't mandating it?
Right.
And that I think can be a very robust conversation
Yeah.
amongst
Yeah.
your educators.
Correct.
About whether or not you want to be introducing a 20% assessment at the end of a course where it doesn't have to be. The
Correct.
state is dictating some of them, whether it's a best practice model to do it
Or not.
or not.
Right.
Beyond that, then becomes, but if you're going to do it,
You
it
have to
should
be
be
consistent.
uniform. It should be
Right.
consistent.
It should be consistent.
So if you're going to do it, everybody should be doing it the
Same
same
way,
way.
yeah.
And if the best practice model is,
And-
no, we're
and-
not going to introduce that, we're only going
Then we have
to
to
do
fight the
this
best
if the
practice
state
model.
says, then that, right?
Yeah.
And so that then becomes a
And
different.
it probably does make academic sense to do something like that, but I tell you, the first line of fire would be the teachers.
And so this discussion really should be that
Yeah.
teacher and principal discussion involved too.
And instructional leaders, yeah.
Absolutely, so, that has a star by it also. Yes, yes, Okay. right, something to be, yeah. Okay, Ms. Bartlett, is there anything else, or anybody see anything on page 3? This is a state.
IS 44, is this what we're
Yeah.
pull that up? To see what that
Well,
is?
we need to do that at another
A
meeting,
different
because I just
time.
noticed
Yeah.
that when you were talking about tests, I noticed it said IS 44 test examination,
Right,
so we
that-
need to take a look at that.
Right,
We
that
do-
will be
we do.
part of this other discussion that we have to have.
We need to figure that
I
out.
so appreciate you, because you wrote
Thank
some
you for
email
what you
about
said.
that.
Yeah, I didn't realize it, so.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
yeah, okay,
So can I just ask where, so this South Carolina Uniform Grading Scale conversions, those numbers like 4.875, 5.375, et cetera, those come from the state?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
No longer effective though.
those were just for
Yeah,
the
but that's-
people,
yeah.
the seniors or
Yeah.
people that
Right.
have completed, yeah.
Yeah.
So that
Number
was,
16.
next year we'll take it out now.
It really
Okay.
is
So you get a
tough.
procedure prior to 2000, so you
Yeah.
have
And
to
this
So I've got to say,
after, yeah,
just make it clear that it's a
215, 216 now.
okay,
okay.
215, 216, okay, thank you. School year, academic year. Do you call it academic year or school year, what's the right word?
I usually use just SY, school
That's
year.
why, school year, okay.
Yeah.
School year, okay.
Well, it'd be actually in 2015, 16, and prior.
2000 school year and prior.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly. And
prior
earlier,
to.
might be a better word.
Yeah, and early.
Right.
Okay.
Did you want to speak to, I'm sorry, on page 2, did you want to speak to, are those not, number 10 and 11 in red at the top, aren't those new designations?
That's what, that
The
was the
AU
uniform
and the
grade.
NP?
Yeah.
Did you,
Just,
the AU is an audited grade class?
And they're not supposed to take the finals, that was
Yeah.
one thing that was in here.
Right, and then, so those are just, for everyone's attention, those
Yeah.
are,
Non-pass and pass.
right, okay. All right, I don't remember that there was anything on page 6. There was just a formatting thing that you
Oh.
suggested.
Oh, that where we put the definitions.
Yeah, so that was changed, right?
One.
Just from the previous one, Ms.
Yeah.
Rodine found, yeah.
yeah, we try to incorporate Ms. Revise in the state, which is, your suggestions and then make it read better.
I did not have any suggestions, I don't know, Mr. Campbell or Ms. Rodine, based on some of this,
That looks pretty,
as
Which
far
is
as.
from the recommendation,
From the
from what the
state.
state gave us.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I need to put BCSD where I have district, though, at the bottom of page 7. Okay, so BCSD at the beginning.
What page are you in?
Yeah, so what I've got to make sure that I do right here, is I do this with policy, I've got to say BCSD instead of district down there at the bottom of page 7. I just
Okay.
corrected my mistake here. Okay.
So one of my questions in this regard is,
What page are you on?
you're at the bottom of 7 there.
Okay.
So you're trying to figure out when a student comes into the district, right, what their grade was from their prior institution.
Right.
So is that then used, this isn't getting right to her question again, are those calculated into the GPA? Because I think before, when my kids were in high school, what you took as a high school course elsewhere, I'm not sure that was calculated for class standing.
For rank.
Yeah, the rank.
Oh, for class rank.
So that's something that should be uniform.
It is, and the complexity of that, from my perspective, is that particularly for students that are transferring in from another South Carolina school,
Yeah.
it's all digital and it's all Power School. And Power School is auto-calculating that stuff.
Uh-huh.
Right, it is. So the kids' GPAs and the kids' class rank and all of that is auto-populated in Power School.
Uh-huh.
So when you start scratching through things and taking things out,
Yeah.
then what you're determining in what Power School shows, and the ripple of that is then nobody behind that child or ahead of that child is right either.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the transcript that goes off to college is the Power School transcript that has the number on it, whether or not. And so I just think you introduce a level of complexity there, because you may determine in-house that child is or is not this number, but the transcript that's going off to college is that number because it's auto-populating that. So though I appreciate where that sentiment would come from, I think it's adding a level of complexity. Does that make sense?
Oh, I
Power School
understand,
is
exactly. Oh, I
totally-
agree, I just think it should be uniform, so that's fine, but now what do you do from a child from Georgia?
But I also think that
Yeah.
a child has to have a certain amount of time in that school
Yeah, exactly.
fully ranked. I think that's, that,
And I
I
think
don't
that's-
know
They
if
can't
that's
come in the last 6
practice.
weeks and
Right.
take the
Yeah,
top.
right,
Exactly.
right.
I think
Because-
they had to be in like the 2 years.
Yeah, I think
Something to
that's,
that
I
effect.
think so.
That
Three
makes sense,
semesters
exactly
or something.
correct. You didn't
Yeah, I
get
think
it
they
all.
have to be in there a while before they
Yeah.
can really,
Right.
you know, you can't come in and
Right. I think
last
that's
2
addressed-
months and to become the valedictorian of the
Right.
class, you know.
That's addressed later on in
It
this.
is,
Yeah.
it's down,
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
We had that
transferring.
problem some years ago, a student came from California,
Yeah.
and there was some discussion, why shouldn't that student wasn't be valedictorian? And he almost got sued.
Yeah, and again, I think the complexity now is that Power School is auto-populating this stuff, and what goes to college is the printout out of Power School. And so part of the digital era is the reality that the transcripts are being auto-calculated in Power School, and that is, so again, thinking through that a little bit, and when you start scratching through things and trying to manipulate that, whether you even can in a meaningful way in the system, I just think it adds a level of complexity.
Yeah. You kind of have to vet every school district in the country
know,
and
exactly.
compare it with yours,
Right.
you know, that's.
Well, and at the same time, our students who are then military kids and they're transferring out and then, you know, so anyway,
Right.
yeah, it's complex.
So, I mean, if everyone is kind of in agreement, and unless you've read this previously, as we did, and given the time, can we jump to number 10, Roman numeral 10, which talks about grade point average, which I think might have some of this. So Molly, did Ms. Henderson say she couldn't be here, or is that Ms. Dixon? And Ms. Henderson?
Ms. Henderson was, what I understood, she was gonna be with us from 3 until 4, but she had a
Okay.
meeting with parents. or
Okay,
something.
and the only reason is that as we discussed some of this yesterday, it was, she gave some insight.
Yeah, she did.
And it would have been, yeah. So if we jump to this, there's this, if you look at D, 10D, that's where Mr. Campbell, I think you were alluding to, and Mr.
Yeah,
Campbell as
right.
well, right? About when you have to be here. So one of the original said the Beaufort County School District Administration will determine, and I took umbrage with that because it sounded so subjective. So they changed it to has determined the criteria for selection of the honor graduates with valedictorian, salutatorian, and top 10. is based on GPA as determined by the uniform grading policy. And then it goes on to say, Mr. Campbell, that the cutoff for determining the GPA is the 7th semester of high school and the third 9 weeks of the senior year. So there's your cohort right there.
It's not addressing transfer students coming in though.
Right, and that's why I wanted to talk about this. I remember yesterday, Wendy, I said I had some questions about this, but I was going to wait till today.
And this was from the website, that language was taken from.
But maybe it does, but we don't see
From
it.
the, right, well,
Because it says as determined, the criteria, but what is that determination other than what's stated here, you know?
that's on the website and in the student handbook and all, and it talks
Right.
about.
How long the
That's
student
right.
have to transfer in before he's qualified?
Well, and the other,
No, I mean, that says that right there.
No,
and the other
doesn't say
complexity,
it.
sorry, and the other complexity that I can definitely speak to is, and it's, to me, it's similar to the 9 weeks grading period, is that you're specifying the 7th semester of high school. When in fact, you have students who may be graduating in advance of the 7th semester. You have students that do exchange programs who aren't there, you know, who do 2 years or gone a year, come back for 2 semesters. So again, it's like specifying 9 weeks, when the reality is, it's really the end of the third 9 weeks prior to graduation. Whether they do it in 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Because you have students who take alternate paths in there, and by saying that it has to be the end of the 7th, you're unnecessarily whittling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't think they mean it like that. I think they mean it, what's the 7th semester?
Well, that's the end of their,
Yeah, April or whatever that semester ends, that no more grades towards the rank goes
so,
in.
but that's not how they're applying it, and I can speak to that because my daughter had a circumstance this past year.
Yeah.
So,
The 7th semester, though, would be your.
would traditionally
That
be.
if you're graduating in 3 years.
Oh, no, I see what I'm saying, but so
You'll
what
never
this
get to
is,
the
Graduating in 3 years,
Right.
class rank,
you
you
can,
know, it's cut off wherever that 3-year level is, but the class rank goes, for the other kids competing against you, goes until the 7th semester.
So here
But
was
why
my.
shouldn't it go to just before you graduate?
okay, so let's, okay, one at a time, so, I'm sorry, if you wanted to finish, Allison.
Well, and again, Dr. Angarski knows this firsthand. So this was my experience this spring, and poor Tricia caught my mama bear moment this spring. So my daughter had the unique opportunity to be an exchange student next year, and she's going to do a gap year at a performing arts school in London. And it's a very prestigious honor. And so she had met with Ms. Allman, who was her principal at the time, and her guidance counselor, and had gotten permission to graduate in 3 years, because she had completed enough credits over middle school and through the 4x4 that she could actually graduate in 3 years, enough to accept this performing arts conservatory program in London for next year. She was told 5 days in advance of graduation that even though her transcript notes that she is number 4 out of 307 in her class, she would not be recognized at Beaufort High graduation as a top 10 graduate,
That was against the.
because she graduated a year early.
Oh my God.
And I said, okay, but wait, what? She did,
That's why I'm bringing.
right, she did all 6 continuous semesters at Beaufort High School. She earned every bit of that recognition. Her Power School transcript shows it. Every college she's gonna apply to is gonna see it. And yet, the girl that was number 5 graduated in number 4, and the girl that was number 11 graduated in number 10.
Because she'd been there the whole,
The
into the
kids all knew
7th semester.
that this was going down.
7th
It was
semester.
very uncomfortable for the child that was 11 graduating as 10, while my daughter sat in the back of the room and what. So that's where, but she was penalized for taking an a-traditional path.
Yeah, I understand.
And so, even though in my opinion, she did it all right, you know, I mean, So I
Right.
think what's hard is very much like saying, we're gonna issue report cards at the end of the 9 weeks. Right, it should be at the end of the third 9 weeks prior to graduation, whether they do it in
Yeah.
3, 4,
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Yeah, fine tune the language.
That, right,
Right.
it's being too narrow and necessarily excluding kids that shouldn't be excluded.
Or else come back and give your daughter 4th place this year.
Well,
This is a senior.
well, she could, and she might have been 4th in the class of 2020, but, and at the end of the day, I mean, again, we all live and we all
Change
learn,
the
and,
language.
and nothing was done malicious, and again, guidance and administration were supportive and understanding, but definitely their interpretation of board policy was she was not eligible for that recognition. And so, of course, my reaching out to Tricia was to say, if this is truly board policy, I hope you all will revisit.
Change it.
She's necessarily being squeezed out. She's being squeezed out unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And it's just because the language is not broad enough to capture
Right.
her as part of her graduating class in the class of 2019.
Yeah, we don't-
Right, so
we don't want
You
funny
said
stuff.
at the end of the third 9 weeks prior to graduation?
But see, I
I don't
don't,
think that's good
again,
either.
no,
That's what you were suggesting,
What?
yeah.
Yeah, again, I don't think we, at this particular time, and I hate to say this, but without our Chief Instructional Services Officer, because.
Or if we had Jerry here.
Or if we had Jerry here, because we had,
Because we have this up, this is up on the website, it's been up there. I mean, this language is verbatim
Right.
from the website. It's been like that for a long time.
and so one of the questions I asked you on the conference call yesterday was, are we seeing more graduates, which is, and Mr. Bennett brought it up today, we are seeing more and more and more graduates that are graduating early, okay? And so the question I asked was, do our policies keep up with our ever-changing practices that are, we are encouraging children to do this. Are our practices now, is it so important to be part of the cohort? You know, is that the key? So I know we right now as an academic committee cannot change this, but we certainly can bring this to the forefront when we're sitting around, you know, with the Chief Instructional Services Officer and other people and Ms. Henderson, you know, so, Dr. Umbarski?
Also, with keeping in mind with that, that reminded me of a child that was denied her on a court for graduation this year because she graduated in December and did not finish. And unbeknown to her, until it was she getting ready for graduation, that she was denied her court. And it was again because she graduated early and did not receive the information that was sent out during her lapse. So when you think about this situation, think about that too. Kids who receive specific honors, not necessarily finishing at our traditional end of the school year, but finishing their Conagry unit requirements. If you, then you should not be denied any of these privileges.
Right, and so when I asked a question about that yesterday, I was told that there is a practice that whenever a student graduates early, that they are advised that they forfeit.
That's what Ms. Mona Lisa was saying.
Ms. Mona Lisa, that they forfeit their,
Accolades.
their accolades, thank you. They forfeit the chance to be a valedictorian, a salutatorian, or a top 10. But they are advised of this by their guidance counselor or whomever they're speaking with. So,
That's not true.
That did not happen in my case.
I'm
I was in the room.
It might
That's-
be in a different school, but certain schools, I agree with you, they do not advise.
And from my standpoint, from my daughter, I can tell you, she wouldn't have changed her trajectory for a minute. She would have done it either way.
Yeah.
But it would have been nice to know 5 days prior to graduation that which she had worked so hard to earn, had she known 18 months ahead when she took that.
Right.
That might have been a different conversation, but I was in the room for those meetings with Ms. Allman, with her guidance counselor with, and none of those conversations.
And I
were-
think that should be brought across the board to all guidance counselors to explain that in detail when the child is sitting there with the parent too, so the parent would know. And like I said, some kids might not even change their way of doing it, but at least give them that knowledge before the deadline.
absolutely.
5 days or you know,
Graduation.
yeah, graduation time.
Nowadays, ahead of graduation, when suddenly they're
Because I
ranking
know of
kids
several
and,
kids
Right.
too that happened the same thing. They didn't get their honors and they were not advised of this and they were heartbroken
Sure,
to know
sure.
that they worked hard for that and then they're not recognized for it.
Dr. Ambarski?
I think this is a really complex conversation that needs to be had, because you also have to think of it from student number 11's perspective, where they did take another whole year of rigorous courses. And had everyone taken the same number of courses, because you can graduate with, they might be graduating with 30 credits. I mean, just depending on how many classes you've taken, their argument could be that we're comparing apples to oranges, and that's not fair. And so I think it's not fair from the perspective that you're coming from, but it's also not fair from the other perspective. And so I think we need to have a much more in-depth conversation that makes sure we think about all of the implications for something that means a lot.
An awful lot, and back in May, when this first was brought to my attention, is there not another form by which these children, these students can be given an accolade? I mean, even, you know, I mean, so you're right, it's, why does this have to be just a 3-sentence? This is a really important thing in a student's graduation life. It deserves more than just, okay, it's your GPA boom, and at the 7th, you know, there could be so many other areas that could be addressed with this. And it is very complex and needs to have that just be the conversation at one of these. Mr. Smith?
No, I was gonna say, I agree with everything you just said, along with just to go to her point. I do see what she's saying, but what I was gonna say was maybe there needs to be a figuring how to come up with a solution to when someone come in, like her daughter's situation, where they're put in, or maybe they're two people, you know, that's a different situation versus the situation Ms. Hampton brought up about the kid with the cord. That's a whole nother.
That's right.
That's I mean that's just a whole nother different situation that you should pretty much just give that kid, because that kid has worked towards it. It's just like saying that this kid has. They've done everything they need to require graduation, but they can't graduate. That's you don't do that. So that kid should have been given that cord. But that situation, I think it would be great if we could come up with a way to form a policy to make that happen. And graduation is such a crucial time, because you have all these situations that occur, and then you know the board members find out about it afterwards. And then I think that's kind of it's hurtful and it's bad, because you would hate for a kid to work all year long for that one moment, and when they get to that moment.
6 years. I mean, she did, right? Well, 5 years in her case. She did 2 years of middle school where she's taking high school credit classes, and then 3 years of high school. And though I really appreciate what Dr. Ambarski says for the child who's 11, at the end of the day, for the kid who is 11 to walk is 10 is also a little awkward, because the kids know where they fall. They know what their transcripts say. So that child can walk as 10 all day long, but if their transcript going to college is, say, 11, that's awkward. I mean, my daughter actually really felt bad for the child who was 11 walking as 10, because for that child it was awkward that she was receiving recognition for something that maybe wasn't real, because her transcript said 11. So she said, Mom, the kids weren't super nice about that either, and that was hard, and it just made drama where it didn't need to be at a time when it just didn't. It should have been nothing but celebratory, and instead it just got weird.
Okay, Mr. Campbell?
Well, can't we make suggestions for the changes here? This is our thing.
Right.
In terms of what suggestions be to the board to change this.
I totally agree with you, and I just my
We
thought.
need to think about what we need to write the
Right.
semester, senior year versus graduating year. It'll be a finer tuned thing. If you're talking graduation year, that allows a child to be number 10.
Right.
If you're talking senior year, then it's distorted.
Right. And I think we should change this. I just think we need to have a few principles here. We need to have a few,
Okay.
what I mean, and just have some of that, and and Ms. Henderson at least.
Okay.
Ms. Henderson?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say that, I would say, Ms. Henderson, we can have them, but my question is this a actual board policy? Does the board set precedent on this policy? Because if the board set precedent on the policy, I'm the type of person, I can hear information, but I have to be humanized as well as to say, my instinct as a human, as a regular average ordinary, the reason why I picked me to be a board member is because I'm not a principal, it's because I'm not in those positions. What's the rightful thing to do? And so that kind of changes it. It's good to hear they have the input, but the ultimate decision is there's a right and there's a wrong way to do it. And the right way is to do it this way. And as a board member, I just don't think that we should solely make our 95% of our determination on what they say, because this is not something data driven.
And
I
I appreciate that input. We would not, if Dr. Lombarski wasn't here, we wouldn't have had her input from, from that side of it. So I agree, the humanity of this needs to absolutely be part of this decision, but also the people that have those that are in the classroom, in the high schools. Ms. Henderson would have had a different point of view and say, well, the reason we have it this way is because, and so therefore I believe we need to look at all. We can still revisit this next academic committee meeting, because Ms. Partledge said that she was going to make these changes and then bring it back to us.
But right now, I don't know what changes to make to this one, I can't.
I don't think we can either, not at this time. Yes, Ms. Romine?
There's reference in here to the life scholarship. What type of criteria is for the life scholarship? I mean, how do they figure that out?
Class rank,
Class
based on the
rank.
Power School transcript, is my understanding.
But
So
don't they
it's
also
based
have
on-
the Palmetto scholarships,
Right.
which I believe the life is,
The
they
life
also
is,
have,
grade
don't they
point
have
average.
ACT and SAT as part of it too? I'm
Right.
pretty sure they do.
They used to.
Okay.
Okay, they
I
used
just
to.
was wondering if that could help us at all here, because it
Yes,
does refer
but
to
that's only based on the
the
PSAT
life
test.
scholarship, but I don't know.
Yeah,
The
that's
Palmetto
a
Scholars,
statement.
that's the one that's purely class rank based
Okay.
on their Power School
Okay.
transcript.
It's class rank and percentage of class, right?
The Palmettos was the
Top-
top 10.
top
That's why this
10.
top 10 is so
Yeah.
important, because that's the
But it's based on
Palmetto
top 10,
score.
and then it's based
Yeah.
on a percentage,
Yeah,
if you're in the
percentage.
top 10% or
Yeah,
something,
top
right?
10%.
Okay, Mr. Nelson?
Hi, appreciate everything y'all are doing. May I ask a question? I recall this with the time my daughter graduated. She took AP courses, 40 hours, finished 2 years of Clemson knocked out right there.
Yeah.
She, it didn't matter where someone was ranked to her, but they did notice that kids who took TCL classes, that affected their GPA more positive because they were less rigorous than the AP courses. AP courses were much more rigorous than TCL courses. So could we ever revisit that situation? Because I've had parents mention that, not just students. TCL courses are not as rigorous as AP courses.
And are they weighted the same?
They're weighted the
They're
same.
waiting the
Okay.
same.
They're weighted the same. And it's not taking anything away from TCL or the students, none of that. But if that's a possibility, we could entertain that in the future.
Thank you.
Right. Have you heard of that before? The TCL?
Yeah.
I've taught at the university level, so I know the AP courses are higher than a 100 level
They
class.
are.
They're like 300.
Yeah.
They are.
Am I wrong?
have asked about that because there is an ongoing controversy, and even one of our top graduators at Beaufort High was accused, I think unfairly and very cruelly by students, of having inflated her grade by going to TCL. I mean, it was an ugly online thing that you hear about after the fact. Well, I don't think it was unintentional.
Oh, really?
No, they were ugly on purpose.
Really?
And when I said, well, if we all recognize that AP classes are at a higher level of rigor, then why do we weight them the same as TCL? If that's a truth, I don't want to just assume that off the fact. But if that's what we're going on right now, that AP classes are more rigorous, why are they weighed the same? When you can allow a student to get an easy A and get the same weight in your GPA. Kind of the same problem as with the final, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I asked, I was told that this weighting was a state level decision, that it was not a district decision. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I was told.
Okay.
And then also, for example, with that, the challenge of that, where there's the challenge of consistency. You don't always have that everywhere you go. I'm not same Langston's, okay, but it was different places. You may have one person who, one test per semester 2 versus several versus weekly assignments, weighting grades this way, you're learning more than book knowledge. Book knowledge is 30% versus actual application is 70. Are they actually mastering it? Then end of year course, am I teaching them at such a level where they master it? Or am I just, oh, here's the final, good luck, sink or swim?
Right.
Because there's lots of children, lots of students who want to do well, want to succeed, but they want the tools to succeed. And providing that consistency across board will help students who may have parents who work in jobs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no,
but
that's
just if
another
we could
very good-
just if we could revisit that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely,
Maybe
absolutely.
state.
Yeah.
I think you're
I
right.
told it was,
Yeah.
because I said,
That's
so you
the
guys
same.
renegotiate the agreement with TCL,
Yeah.
and I was told no, that wasn't
Yeah,
a district
because
level.
I'm reading the state thing now.
Yeah, I think that is the state.
And Ms. Jones wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a state policy. The same thing went into place right after my graduation in North Carolina, and my sister is dealing with it now.
I don't want to get
Okay.
right.
Yes.
Right, but she's
Um,
successful for her.
So that 10D has 2 stars next to it. Okay, that's not, I mean, you know, so I just,
I'd like to say one other thing about it, and that is, along the lines of Dr. Ingarsky, I think traditionally the reason why you had to be a 4-year high schooler to be in the top 10 was because exactly likelihood you've taken more courses to get there. Not necessarily more college courses or whatever, but more courses. And you can also then think of, okay, well, I'm gonna graduate 10th if I'm 10th in my class junior year. But I got enough credits to graduate, and if I graduate now and they let me graduate early after 3 years, I could be number 2 in that class. But that's maybe the reason why they didn't allow that, is because then people would start jumping around. But I know traditionally, I mean, I knew about this for years, none of my kids graduated early, but one of my friends, her daughter graduated early, so I knew she would not be a ranked child or whatever.
but you know,
But see,
when I heard
there's-
about this, I thought, okay, so we are by a 4x4 schedule, and all the dual college enrollment and the, you know, Whale Ranch Early College, we are encouraging kids to, so have our practices kept up with our methods? And so that's why it needs to really be revisited. Just to draw your attention, just last, as I know it's after 5, there was also a change regarding changing grades. Those of us that have been here, let's see, it's number 15. Those of us that have been here for several years in the district know that changing grades was a very hot topic several years ago. And the original said that at least 2 people must agree to the change. And so that has been deleted because it is the purview of the teacher. The grade is the purview of the teacher. And when we saw that, what do you mean it took 2 people to make a change? That conflicted with 1E, as I recall, where it says, assignment of student grades is the purview of the teacher. So that, I think that was a very crucial thing that was changed. So I would just like to, Ms. Robine and Mr. Campbell, get your opinion, but I mean, it should be determined that we will revisit this, you know, school's starting. I mean,
Close the door on it, so you revisit it and get some definitive responses to some of our questions.
Right, and I don't think that's going to happen before school starting. So I think the changes that have been made in this will probably have to come up in front of the board, just as an information. It's not a motion, it needs to be approved of.
But I wanna make sure we're doing it right, and I wanna ask you so on number 15, on grade changing, should we say substantial documentation must exist to warrant the proposed grade change and only the student's teacher of record? I mean, we do say the form should be signed with the teacher of record, the school principal, substantial documentation must exist to warrant proposed grade change and only the teacher how do you wanna word that?
Bob, a question.
Every teacher
No, I think
needs
just
to know.
taking out the fact that
Is
it's
that good
said
enough?
two
I just
people
wanna
have
make
to
sure.
agree,
Well,
because,
Yeah.
excuse me one
Okay.
second, Ms. Smith, because it does say up here that it's the purview of the teacher.
Yeah,
And then there's
just
this
wanna
whole
make sure
form
it's
you
covered.
have to go through to change a grade.
Okay, so it's,
And it has to get signed off by the principal, but it's the
Okay.
teacher that,
it's the purview of the teacher.
right.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Bernadette, with that,
Yes.
and Dr. Larson?
The other thing though is that there is not always a formal, when it says a meeting of the principal, teacher of record, and school counselor, does that mean in the same room at the same time?
Good question.
Because
It
that-
might be a walk-around meeting.
Does not
Right.
happen in practice.
Right.
And that's why I was gonna ask, my question was gonna be to her, like how we did a policy meeting, what does the state law says on this? What is the law on this?
A te-
I was
It's a
asking,
teacher's purview.
Right.
Right, I was gonna ask, Mrs. Ms. Cartledge, what's the state law statute on this?
I have to look it up right now.
Yeah.
I don't have it right in front of me,
Yeah,
but I'll find it,
Yeah,
I'll find it, don't worry.
Usually there's a time limit on when the grade can be
So,
changed
about-
too, it just doesn't
Like
really
90 days.
address.
It says before
Is
the
it
beginning of the next school year.
But at a college level, it would be like within a week or five
Right.
days of the grade being issued. I mean, let's say you determine, hey, they gave me the wrong grade, I have my test right here and they didn't average it right. I mean, that's usually.
There is a policy.
I think that 90 days.
To me,
I
Middle
think,
school, but I know at Hilton Head High School, there was a policy of the window when you can change
yeah,
the grade
exactly.
and
It's
you
like
can't
you
change.
shouldn't go to the.
I think that it's that broad because we do have students who are on homebound, who do have extended instruction through the summer.
Okay.
You still have to give them a grade, you still have to put in zeros for the missed work, but they do have the extended time, sometimes through the summer, to complete the work, and that would require a grade change form.
I see.
Right.
And I think that's why it
like
goes
that.
that far.
Right, and then Power School puts it into a historical code, and then that takes more documentation to change a historical grade compared to a current grade.
Yeah.
So there's some,
I
it
think-
depends on when,
I
right?
think
And there's also
they're
an access
referring
point.
to,
I mean, when you start going into historical power school, it gets very narrow as to who can
As to who
actually
can-
make that change,
Right.
which is why then there's additional paperwork and additional, because a lot of the school base can't even make those changes. We have to partner with the district office to make those.
yeah, they're not talking about the final grades, transcript grades here. I don't think they're talking about
They might be, but you're
intermediate
right,
grades. Yeah.
that's not even spelled out
That's
specifically
not
whether
spelled
it's a
out, but I
final
think-
grade,
Yeah, I
right?
think, grades that are permanent.
Mhm.
You can't change permanent grades unless you have those.
Right.
Or else you'll be going to that principal every week.
Right, it is only academic and stored.
Right.
Once the data specialist hits store grades, that's when
Right.
the grade change form is
Right.
invoked.
Right. And then, I'm sorry, but just to go back to number 3, so Wendy, some of the conversation we had yesterday about each of the 2 9-week grades, we talked about, that didn't make the change, that didn't make into, did you guys have a conversation about that afterwards?
Just a second, I was trying to look up something from Mr. Smith.
Oh,
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
That
I was waiting
final
for that.
grade,
okay, I'm sorry.
that's all right.
Number
Final
3,
grade calculation,
remember the long conversation we had about 2 9-week,
right?
the conversation, they're not 9 weeks. So we
Right, and we
talked.
were-
She addressed that thing.
What did we change it to? You said each academic grading period. Right. At the end of each academic grading period, as we just talked about that today.
Right, on 1B, I'm talking about on
Right.
3, right?
Right, I'll have to
Yeah, so-
change that
Right,
when I go
okay,
back.
great. No, we just didn't talk about that in here, so.
So I'll have it say at the end of each academic grading period. Is that of the 2, I guess we should say, do you want to say of the 2 academic grading periods? Of the 2 academic grading period, how do you want to say it, because you have 2 there,
Thank
do
you
you
for
know?
coming. Semester grades should be determined by a weighted percentage of
The
the,
2 academic grading periods in the semester,
Mhm.
grades in the semester.
I think taking those numbers out leaves us room to be able to go year round, or.
Academic grading period.
I would love to have October and March off.
Oh, that was a beautiful thing when we were year round. It was
That
a
was the best
beautiful
one.
thing.
It is
Wasn't it
awesome.
the best?
It was,
the best.
and the kids did well, you had learning time in
Oh.
between. between.
And it didn't affect
I'm
sports.
for it.
Did you say you guys get
Thank
that?
God.
We did, it's, the problem was,
Because I don't care about sports. I played it.
not everybody did it. And so you had some families that had high schoolers that went traditional and middle schoolers and elementary, so, anyway, so, thank you, Wendy, I apologize for.
Just 1 minute, so thank you. Final grade calculation, semester grade should be determined by weighted percentage of the 2 academic grading periods, grades in the semester. Each of the 2 academic grading periods, grades will equal 50% of semester grade.
I think so.
Yeah.
And just get rid of those numbers, because that's not
Right.
our practice. Yeah.
2 semester grades should count for total, but I've got on the star here, speak with Dr. Rodriguez about
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
Because there's this issue about how much is a final grade,
Right,
final exam
right.
count towards the
Right.
grade, and that's gotta be consistent for y'all.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
I
while-
wanna make sure I got these changes. I think I
Thank
do.
you. While we are looking at the calendar, maybe Mr. Smith's question can be addressed.
Yes.
Thank you. So we need to schedule the next academic committee meeting. And,
Right, to find a date that fits your schedule.
well, if you two need to meet without, because I am leaving town for 3 weeks. And, yeah,
Does this, when is this revision due to the state? Did we have to, is
Well,
this
we just
AR?
have to have these changes need to be implemented at the 2019-2020 school year.
Okay,
and school
So-
starts for teachers.
And on August 19th, so we'd have this done by August 19th.
Right,
Before August 19th. So if we could, the best ideal thing would be to be able for us to meet prior to the first board meeting in August so that we can have these revisions made and have
Right.
it in place so that, because we'll have the principals meeting and we need to go over this with them.
Right.
And
Right.
legally, we have to have
This
our
has to be-
grading scale, our grading out on the first day of school.
Right, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
August 6th is the board meeting.
August 6th is the board meeting.
Right.
So you're out of the picture.
Right, so it's whatever you two
Yeah.
can do, and then,
Anytime, Kathy. Not past 2 o'clock at night.
Well, you know what, I think we need to make sure that, Ms. Henderson, that we've got the right people here. So maybe we need to find out from them when they can commit to be here, because for us to go through this again without
I know
them,
you need them here,
Yeah.
and as we talked about
Spinning our
yesterday,
wheels.
that they need to be present.
so I think you decide when you guys can meet, and Dr. Rodriguez can make sure they're here.
okay. How about, August 1st or July 31st? July 31st, there's a finance committee meeting at 5 o'clock, or 5:30 or something, so we can have.
And that's
people-
here, I
And
believe.
that's here,
I have to go to Charleston for mediation in
okay,
case.
On the 31st?
okay, then August 1st or August 30th, what do I have on my calendar?
July 30th.
July, I have a dentist appointment, sorry, I can't make it.
31st sounds good to me. First is,
Well, 31st,
that's one of those days that I
Wendy,
can't.
Wendy is
I'll be here
here.
if the case, if we settle it
Yeah,
early
but
in
we don't
mediation,
know.
but we don't know about that. I mean, I could be there for 12 hours.
What time,
That's what that's the
what
last
time are you
one.
talking about on the first?
In the afternoon, because I have
Okay, after 4, let's say 4.
That sounds good for me.
Yeah, 4 o'clock on the first.
Yeah.
Okay.
August 1st, 4th?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, who do we need here?
we need Jerry Henderson,
Yeah,
And
and we did have Mona Lee Dixon was gonna be part, I don't know if she's still available, but she's a high school principal.
who else, Trish? Do you?
Well,
Who else
it
needs
was-
to be there?
I think, if by chance there's a chief instructional officer here,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah.
If there is one that is hired by that time.
Well, the question is, if they're selected before that, right?
Mhm.
Don't they have to go through the board?
We could have a
First
special
or
call
no?
meeting.
Oh,
I do, I think that technically
Those
they do.
interviews are, I believe, on the 30th, I believe it's on the 30th, 31st, so.
Okay, well then that would, so someone couldn't just sit in like any community member can sit in?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I'll leave that up to take
Yeah,
it
they
up for
could,
discussion,
and-
but, I mean,
Thank you
that's
so
just-
much. Yeah. I think that if you have selected someone, then,
But-
even though it's,
Yeah, okay. If we want that person to start right away, because we really need someone to start right away, wouldn't it be
But
good
it's
to
on
have
your
a special
calendar.
called meeting just so we could approve the personnel selection? I mean, I think that's way.
when are the interviews?
That probably would need to be a
30th,
conversation.
31st.
Please.
31st?
30th.
And you're meeting the first, right?
That probably would need to be taking, that conversation probably would need to be taking place.
Because several candidates
Not here.
are out of
Yeah, yeah.
town.
So, anyway, you can decide that, but definitely Ms. Henderson would,
Yeah.
should be here as a secondary,
Yeah.
director
Yeah.
of secondary.
Yeah, I
Because
agree.
some of these questions we had today could have been answered.
Yeah.
Not expected to, not expected to. Okay, so, maybe we can talk for a few minutes,
Yeah,
let's
for sure.
conclude the meeting.
Yep.
Okay, so the next meeting is August 1st at 4
At
o'clock.
4 o'clock here.
Okay? Yeah. Okay, do I have a motion to?
I move we adjourn.
Who's that?
All in favor?
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you, everybody, thank you.
Who's that?